Hello and welcome to our talk on Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. This week, as I'm sitting here talking to you, we have heard some great news. We've heard that a vaccine, potential vaccine, is available for COVID-19. It's the result of the most amazing effort across the world by scientists. They've been working across the nations night and day to develop a vaccine against this horrible disease that we're all living through that's causing this pandemic. And I'm sure there have been many, many late nights. I'm sure there have been moments of elation and moments of disappointment when they've really just had to push on in. But basically, those scientists have been putting their all into this effort. They've been devoting their incredible intellectual skills, huge resources, the effort of many, many people working together towards this one goal, to produce something that's going to be an absolute outstanding good for humanity. And I think we just have to be thankful that we live in a world where there are people who can and will do that. We can say that those individuals have, to use a phrase, used their talents really well. So that's a relatively simple explanation of this parable of the talents that we can read in Matthew. And it says a lot about what it means on one level, but I want us to dig a little bit deeper and see what it might be saying to us today. So our reading starts by talking about a man going away and leaving his property for some time, and he's going to come back, but no one knows when. Remind you of anything? Where we find ourselves as humanity between the resurrection and the second coming, which is something we think about during Advent, the second coming, where we find ourselves now is in the Master's property, in that space when he's left, when he's gone away, and we don't know how long he's going to be gone. And he's left us with some talents. Now I'm going to think a little bit more about what those talents might be in a few moments. But let's just think a bit about what our responsibilities are, having been left with control of the property, control of this world. Our responsibility as individual Christians is to use our talents, and as I said, we're going to think a little bit more about what those talents are, and they're not just those physical and human talents that we think about so often as we use that word. Let's remember the word talent was actually a monetary figure. It was about a deposit that was left with people of money. And that's going to be sort of relevant when we think exactly what those talents might be. But what might our responsibility with? Because Jesus taught us that our responsibility as those who follow him, who follow his way, is to make the world more like the world that he taught us. In that way, we are part of making thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as we follow Jesus' teaching. Earlier in this week, I was actually reading Titus, which is a lovely short little letter. It won't take you a few moments to read it, but I'm just going to read you out one verse, which is really good. And in it, it says that those who have come to believe in God may be careful to devote themselves to good works. These things are excellent and profitable to everyone. So we've been given these talents for a purpose. The purpose is to bring Jesus into this world, to bring the way of being that he was, the way of believing, the way of being with other people that he brought to bring his healing into this world. Just as a little digression, what about the fact that some people got 10 and some people got 5 and some people got only 1? I used to get really upset about that actually when I first read it, because somehow it just didn't feel fair to me. But you know, thinking about that vaccine, I'm really glad that some people got 10 talents, that they've got that intellectual capacity, that inventiveness, that ability to do something so amazing. I am intensely grateful that there are some people out there with 10 talents. But the point is that this story isn't really about what we have or what we're given in the sense of quantity. It's about how we live our lives. Do we live our lives totally for God, for Jesus? Do we really commit and put our all, just like those scientists, into living our lives the way that we have learned through the Gospels and through the New Testament that we are to live our lives? Those with the 10 talents, they haven't coasted. The 10 talents that we see in the story from Matthew, or the 10 talents that we are talking about here. The guy with 10 talents, they didn't sit there and say, oh, well, you know, I've got 10, I can do a fair bit of work and get a pretty good return on that, 50% return, that'll do. No, to get another 10 talents, they really had to put their effort into it. Just like those scientists, they had to work really hard. So if someone wants to really make a difference, they have to be truly committed. And that's what Jesus is calling us to be through this parable. If, as Titus says, we are those who have come to believe in God, we've got to commit our whole lives to him. Not just our free time, not just the spare bit of money we have, not God after family, not God when life's going well, not God just when life's going badly and we call out for help. No, God all the time, for everything and with everything. Because the thing is, when we commit ourselves to serve him, just as those people committed to serve the master in that parable, he gives us something. And I'm not thinking about those human skills. I said I'd come back to it. What he gives us is a deposit, a talent that is beyond human. It is the deposit of the Holy Spirit. Because he's left the property, but he hasn't taken everything away. He hasn't left us bereft. He's left us with something that will enable us to do the work he's called us to do. He's left us with the power of the Holy Spirit. And I don't want to just skate by that warning word at the edge of the parable. That servant who didn't realise the value of the resources he'd been given, who chose to turn his back on the generosity of God, leaving that deposit of the Holy Spirit, he placed himself under God's judgment. He'd been given the alternative, but he chose not to. Each one of us has been given the deposit, and each one of us can say yes. Not a single one of his servants was left with nothing. Everyone was given something. And they worked with that something that they had. So long as they drew on the gifts that he'd given them, then he doubled the blessing. So each of us have the power to grow God's kingdom. How each one of us does it is going to be different. But the step that Jesus is calling us to make is to commit to him totally. He's not asking us to do it alone, because he's given us the means to do it with. He's given us that deposit, that gift of the Holy Spirit, whose power we can draw on. And he's promised that as we draw down on that deposit, he will keep filling it up. To each who's have been given will receive more. So just as you go away from this talk, just give thanks for the deposit that you've been given, the deposit of the Holy Spirit. Just commit to using that deposit, and just know that as you draw on it, that deposit will just be refilled and refilled.